movies of various genres and decades. Stay tuned for this episode. Hello again. This is MovieNaut, and we have another episode for you. This is episode 14, and we're going to talk about random horror movies. And this is a part 1 of 2. So I'm going to let Gary start up.
Okay, and I've chosen to do some movies. Every one of these are indie movies, and every one of them I've recorded or reviewed at Spooky Ventures. And I'm going to do them chronologically, starting with a movie called Nightmare Man, which was released in 2006. And interestingly enough, if you're a Trekkie and you watch Star Trek Picard, the one doctor in there is Tiffany Shepis. And she's actually one of the stars of this movie. She's actually kind of a scream queen. And the movie it's indie, so it is low budget, but it's also pretty freaky because the premise is this woman is having these visions about this guy in this mask stalking her and stuff. And she's supposed to go in for treatment, but the car breaks down. And then her husband disappears, and she winds up going to this cabin to get help because she's convinced she's being chased by this guy. But I don't know how much I really want to give away, but let's just say that the movie isn't quite what you think it is. And late in the film, like in the third act, it takes this complete twist into a total supernatural thriller thing with demonic possession and all kinds of stuff, almost a Evil Dead kind of thing, and with like over the top graphic violence and stuff and gore, and it is a really fun movie. And I'm surprised it has sat under the radar for so long. It's actually the kind of thing that is sort of going to become one of my regular Halloween season watches because it's just such a good movie. I highly recommend it.
Sounds good.
Does sound like an interesting one. So what I chose to do with the random horror movies is I kind of looked at some of the movies that we probably should have hit by now. So one of them we actually talked about, or more specifically, maybe I should have hit by now for most of these at least. But one of them that I wanted to start off with, I think Gary and I actually talked about it in an episode not too long ago, was Plan 9 from Outer Space. It is the ultimate cult movie. It's such a cult movie, it might not even be a cult movie anymore. It's most famous for being labeled the worst movie ever made. And I happen to have a prop. The book that named it the worst movie ever made was the Golden Turkey Awards. So if you don't know your Plan 9 folklore, Ed Wood was the director, writer, producer, editor of this turkey. And he was really drunk at this point in his life. He was really heavily an alcoholic. It's one of his low points of his career that didn't really have too many high points to begin with anyway.
All right.
And his one star that he used to show in some of his movies, that appeared in some of his movies, of course, was Bela Lugosi. He was in Glen or Glenda. I did that one not too long ago, which The Hill I Will Die On that's actually a pretty good movie. This one is not. This one is totally worth making fun of and just totally trashing. Throw your popcorn at the television or screen or whatever. And but it can be kind of fun. So they were coming out with this book, Harry and Michael Medved, called the Golden Turkey Awards, and they asked people to vote, people within Hollywood now, to vote for what they thought was the worst movie, the worst director, and the worst couple of other categories. Those are the 2 categories that Ed Wood won. And this is the one that won.
One in quotes.
Yeah. This is the one that won in quotes. As it was labeled the worst movie ever made by other producers, directors. So the plot, if there is, interestingly though, this might be one of the first coming back from the dead zombie movies. Because when we did our zombie episode earlier, this was actually on my long list. It didn't make my short list. most of the early zombie movies that I talked about in that episode, they weren't dead people coming back to life. They were usually people who were in trances and took medication or some kind of drug to make them in this trance state where they did things that they didn't know what they were doing. This one actually does bring dead people back to life, and they do, supposed to be attacking people. It has a decent cast, actually. It has a post-mortem Bela Lugosi, who literally comes back from the dead to be in this because so he was leaving rehab as well. Bela was actually addicted to opioid painkillers because of some medical conditions that he had. He was in the hospital for several months because of it. He did not get released because he was cured. He was released because he ran out of money. And Ed Wood was his friend at that point, and he shot a couple of scenes. He kind of helped Bela Lugosi just to lift up his spirits a little bit. Said, "Hey, I'm making another movie," even though at that time he actually wasn't. And just filmed some scenes with Bela, and they actually wind up in this movie later on that he just kind of spliced together rather haphazardly. Doesn't really make any sense what's going on. So Plan 9 from Outer Space is the ninth plan from aliens that are trying to take over the world by resurrecting the dead people to attack live people. The cast not only features Bela Lugosi, it also features Vampira, one of the first, if not the first, hosted horror movie host. They say her and who is it? The cool ghoul. What's his name? They might have been tied for the first and didn't even know each other were doing this at the same time, which is interesting. But at any rate, she's in it. Tori Johnson, pro wrestler, who appeared in several of Bela Lugosi's movies and several other movies on his own. Huge hulking person is in this. He plays one of the ghouls. What was his name? There was a guy who was in burlesque shows, doing the cross dressing thing. There, he appears in this too. Bunny was his nickname. He was a good friend of Ed Wood's anyway. He also makes an appearance in this. I kind of steals it actually. I kind of like. Oh, and Chriswell is in it too. Makes the predictions in the beginning. These future events will happen in the future.
Yeah, that opening monologue is so absurd.
I said it in the Glenn or Glenda episode when I was talking about it. Some of his movies work on another level. That's really is surreal. That if he was doing this on purpose, he'd be like high art movies, actually.
Right.
So you get some great things like the tombstone, famous tombstone that falls during the one scene. The dialogue, many of the actors complained that you couldn't really say it. It wasn't the way people speak. So Vampira refused to say any of the dialogue and said she wants to play their part mute. So with Vampira playing her part mute, Bela Lugosi is no longer with us. They had to give all of the speaking lines to Tori Johnson. Doesn't speak very well. Most of the time he has no speaking lines because he doesn't speak very well. So but my favorite part, so Tori Johnson plays one of the cops that investigates a murder, one of the early murders, and then he gets off and he comes back as a zombie. But my favorite part is one of the other guys who's a cop itching his chin with a supposedly loaded gun while he's doing his dialogue. Like a cop would really blow his head off if we had a really loaded gun doing that. Anyway, there's just some great stuff in there. Scenes go from night to day and back to night again. Hubcaps are hanging on fishing wire to represent your spaceships that are invading the Earth. And of course, they're round when they're in the sky, but somehow when they're down on the ground, there's a corner on one of the spaceships, and the guy's walking around. There's a corner, and it was a round. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, lots of great stuff in there. Plenty of stuff to make fun of. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. It's almost like Easter eggs trying to catch all the goof ups in that movie.
Oh yeah.
Let me say this: if someone thinks that's the worst movie ever, there are a lot of movies they haven't seen. Because there are plenty of movies that are worse.
Oh yeah,
it's very bad. It's a stinker, but there are a lot of worse movies.
And honestly, I might even agree with you on that. And one of the reasons that I like people like Ed Wood and somebody else I'm going to talk about later, Paul Naschy, they don't make great films they have such enthusiasm for the genre that I really do I legitimately enjoy their films just because it shows up on the screen how much they love what they're doing. And I can name a couple of other people who are famous in horror that did not like this stuff at all. And when I
Yeah.
watch their movies, it shows up on the screen to me too. And I think their movies are far worse, in my opinion. And I could sit through, Ed Wood in an all night marathon. But some of these others, you just, you can tell they didn't enjoy what they were doing, and it's just a stinker. But
Right. I
I
think
kind
there
of like
was
it
a remake.
just because it makes it better. I'm sorry,
And I,
Ron.
and I think there was a remake.
That
There
And it
sounds
was
was.
familiar.
There
in
was a
2015. I haven't watched it, but
I
I'm
have
told
not.
that it's probably not as campy.
I think it's intentionally campy this time. They went for kind of the comedy. One of my friends is in it, Mr. Lobo, who's another horror movie host. He has the Chriswell spot on there.
Oh,
So
cool.
I don't mind plugging that remake. I believe there's even a sequel, maybe even multiple sequels. One of them is called Plan 10 from Outer Space, which I have not sat down to watch. I think it was many years later, not by Ed Wood. And I think there was one or two others that actually were attempted sequels to Plan 9 that I probably should sit down and watch just to, just to say I did it.
There you go.
But that's
All
my
right.
first.
Oh, it's a classic,
It is.
for various reasons. All right. Well, my first one is from 1982. It's called The Beast Within. Now, this is a good old-fashioned sci-fi horror because there's a monster involved. It starts off with a couple there. Takes place in the 50s, and the couple's going down the road, and I think they had a pulled off to the side, and then the wife gets, I'm going to just use the word accosted by this creature, and nothing happened until she found out she was pregnant. She didn't know that it was because of the monster, and later on, the grown kid, who was about 18, they're going back to that area, and it turned out that the monster was part cicada, and and it was just this really gross, for 1982, really gross kind of special effects, and it had almost like a 50s throwback to those teen monster movies, and I always go back to this one because this is one of the earlier VHS rentals that I got. I mean, a lot of these ones I'd never seen them in the actual movie theater. I just seen them after the fact, and on VHS. And this one is a really good one if you like that, kind of like the 50s monster throwback with 80s special effects. Really good one. That's my first one.
Okay, and that brings us back to me. And so my title is sort of similar to yours, actually, for my second one. It's Animal Inside, which came out in 2022, but it's kind of odd because it actually originally was released in 2018 as Betsy. But it opens with this girl getting attacked, and she survives the attack. And then we sort of see, like, a month later, she's visiting a friend. And what she was attacked by is a werewolf. And so she becomes a werewolf. And you don't see, you see a lot of vampire movies. You don't see a ton of werewolf movies, especially in low budget indie films. And I think a lot of it's just the special effects are probably expensive, but they do a pretty good job of it in this movie. You can definitely tell it's an indie. There are some issues with the audio. there are some other issues with it here and there. One of the things that really stands out, and I interviewed the director, Sean Burkett, and I mentioned this to him. One of the things that really stands out is a lot of the dialogue between the characters is just genuinely funny, man. I found myself laughing the way these guys were relating to one another. And he said he didn't even write that stuff. He just put the actors together, gave them a basic idea what the scene was about, and they did it themselves. And it's fun. And like I say, you don't get to see a lot of female werewolves in movies either. And that was a nice little twist on it too. And it's pretty gory, but it's not over the top gory. It's a fun movie, I think. And again, it's one. All of these really have gone under the radar because they're so indie, but it is well worth checking out.
Sounds cool. I like werewolf movies.
That's one of two werewolf movies I have on my list, actually. So
cool.
Well, I'm going to be doing a werewolf movie coming up here eventually myself. So.
All right.
Uh-oh.
Or should I say, "Ow"?
All right. So, am I up?
Yeah.
All right. So, I guess I'm up. So my second movie is I decided to do the Giant Gila Monster because it's actually one of my favorite giant monster romps that wasn't filmed in Japan. It's directed by Ray Kellogg, who only did 2 movies in his entire career. And if you watch them both, you really want this guy to move on, and you want a time machine and go back there and talk to this guy and say, "You got to do more movies. You did a really good job on both of these." He does this in The Killer Shrews. Most people like The Killer Shrews better. I think they're both good, but I kind of like the Giant Gila Monster better personally.
If I can interject one thing here,
Sure.
Film Masters recently did a double disc set of the 2 movies together, and they're really, really nice prints. If you like those movies, I highly recommend getting them.
Yeah, thanks for the info on that. Yeah, they are. They're both good. They make a good double feature. You can watch them back to back. They blend very well together. The thing that he does very well is it's very logical. Nothing happens that's out of logic. The one thing that people criticize the Giant Gila Monster for and say, well, there's this one thing about the Giant Gila Monster that's not logical at all. At the end of the movie, there's some nitroglycerin that comes about. Where did that come from? If you watch the movie, earlier in the movie, all the critics seem to miss this scene where this guy is transporting nitroglycerin in his pickup truck. And he breaks down, and he goes to the garage, and he says, "I need you to fix my truck, and I'm carrying this nitro. Can you put it in the shed?" It doesn't just appear out of nowhere, when it sneezes. Maybe that's a little bit of a spoiler, but I just it has to be said because it drives me crazy when people say they hate, they don't like this movie because of that nitroglycerin thing at the end there. But the title is pretty much what the plot is. There's a giant Gila monster out in the Arizona desert. One thing that's really cool about it that makes it more logical, they don't try to explain how the giant Gila monster got there. Nobody really knows. It's somewhat implied that there were nuclear tests, out there, in certain desert areas out there, but they never say specifically this is what caused it. And you have a teenage boy who, well, he's not really a teenager. He's kind of 19, maybe teenage, just fresh out of high school. He works at the garage. He's the one, fighting the monster. But also another thing people criticize it about is the sheriff kind of goes to him for help, and they're like, "Well, what kind of a sheriff would go to the kid for help?" And they're looking, well, he's looking for help with other teenagers who are doing bad things. What kind of a sheriff would do that? A good one. One who really does his job well.
And that was sort of a thing. That was sort of a thing with a lot of those 50s movies, like The Blob and.
Yes. They're always, I hate teenagers. So many of them are like that. And it kind of appeals to some of the teen crowd. Yeah. But they're kind of over the top. They're not really believable. I enjoy them. But this is actually more believable. This is what a good cop would do. Doesn't just want to go out and bust people's heads all the time and bust everyone. He's really trying to solve problems, solve crimes. So that's another thing. And little Easter egg that I'll point out is there's a guy named Shug Thomas in there who's kind of a comedian of the time, and he does a little bit of kind of comedy type stuff in there. He goes all the way back to the 30s. Character actor, love my character actors. I just got to give him a shout out. I know he's long gone. Any of his relatives are watching this, or anyone else who was a fan. Usually he's in westerns, by the way, as one of the comedy sidekicks. You know, like Gabby Hayes and Fuzzy St. John and those kinds. Well, Shug Thomas was another one of those, and he pops up in this thing. So it wouldn't be classic camp if I didn't mention those kinds of things. So that's my second one. Really fun monster romp, just over an hour. Um, Ray Kellogg. When we build that time machine, somebody's got to go back there and talk to this guy and say, you really should have stuck with this movie thing because you did a good job on two movies. And I'd like to see what else you have.
Sounds good. I love those kind of monster movies. Love them. All right. That brings us back to me, and this one I believe is an indie film from 1985, The Boys Next Door. It has Max Caulfield and Charlie Sheen, and these are some kind of well, not loners, but they're just kind of creepy kids, and they live on the outskirts of Los Angeles. I want to say like in the desert somewhere, and they go to the party after graduation, and they're trying to fit in, but they just really don't, and they just get into some trouble there, and then they basically just says, "Screw it, let's get in the car and just go down to LA and see what kind of, maybe we can have fun down there. Maybe people will be fun." And just events turn to where they become killers. They start killing people because they're not, especially the women, they're not doing what they want them to do. They want to have fun, and one of them was a hippie ish type, and it was just really, really well done, I thought. And what I liked about in the opening credits, they talk about the different notorious serial killers over the years, and just basically that they all originally were the boys next door. And this is one, I think, what's her name, Penelope Spheris did this, and she did a couple other low budget type films, and this is really one that I don't see anybody really talking about, and it's really that good. I mean, the violence is not really too terrible, but it just, a lot of it is just kind of implied, where it's like these innocent people, that these two start killing, and it totally off character for both of these actors. I mean, they're usually playing more upbeat type of characters, and this one they're really dark kind of characters. And it's recommended, especially if you like those two actors, to see something that's not normally the pepper roles that they would play. So that's, I don't know if you guys seen it, but it's really good.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, sounds good. I haven't seen that.
And that's my second film.
Okay, well, that brings us back around to me. And I'm doing a movie from 2022 this time called We Found Something. And it is a very low budget found footage horror. And the one complaint I will make about it is a lot of the movie, the early parts, are footage of this brother and sister traveling together and sort of arguing with each other and stuff. And that goes on a little long, and it gets a little dull at times. I think it would have been a better movie if some of that were cut out of it. But then once it gets into the whole horror aspect, it gets much better. And by the way, the whole thing is framed by a guy who says he found the footage and he's showing it, which actually becomes important at the end of the movie, but I'm not going to tell you why. But there's a real twist to it at the end. But it's, they sort of get a glimpse of this creature and they don't know what it is. It's kind of looks human, but it's almost dog-like, and it's there. And the brother is like, we got to see what this is. I'm going to follow it around and try to find it. And the sister's like, no, let's go back to the car. And, ultimately he keeps following, and they find a tent with a girl who's all mutilated, and they're trying to get out of there. And it's it's a lot scarier in a lot of ways than say Blair Witch. And I also interviewed the director of this, Jesse Heisel, and he said he took a lot of the pacing. He like actually sat down and timed out Blair Witch and tried to do a lot of the pacing in that sort of way. But I think this is paced better to me.
Right.
It's definitely a more low budget production than that, but I think the pacing is a little better actually. But it's a fun movie, and like I said, the ending comes out of nowhere. It's I did not see that coming. It's a total twist. But yeah, it's fun stuff. Another I highly recommend.
Oh, cool.
Hey, I have another prop.
Uh-oh.
If I can get this thing off of here. All right, so
There you go. You've been wanting to use that.
yeah, now I have a hat. See, I got a hat just like everybody else. All right, I really should have touched on some Samson movies is what they call them in the United States. Really, they're Santo movies, which translates into the Saint. So I chose Samson versus the Vampire Women. One of my favorites. If you haven't seen any of the Samson / Santo movies, Samson is either a pro wrestler who moonlights as a superhero, or he's a superhero who moonlights as a pro wrestler. Nobody's really sure which is the day job and which is the night job. Kind of does both of them at night, really. But they're a lot of fun if you haven't seen any of them. This is one of my favorites. Usually you have a scene where Samson is in a pro wrestling match, and then he gets out and somebody calls him on his car. He has a car phone in the 1960s. How about that? Somebody calls him on his car phone and tells him, hey, something weird is happening over here. You should check it out. So he goes over and he checks it out. And there's usually some kind of monsters, and he has to fight and wrestle the monsters throughout the movie. I've seen them overdubbed. I've seen them with subtitles, and I've seen them in Spanish without subtitles. You can still follow the plot. It's still just as much fun in all three formats. One thing I wanted to bring up too, I brought up a little while ago when we did the Roger Corman episode. When I did all the Roger Corman episodes, movies, American International Pictures is responsible for Samson coming to the United States. Came to American International Television. So he actually had a little bit of a hand in that kind of thing too. A lot of those international movies, we would never have known about it if it weren't for American International Pictures and or Roger Corman's own studio when he started distributing foreign films, because they started showing foreign films in the US because they weren't drawing as much. He picked them up. So, just makes for another argument that he is one of the most influential people in the entire history of Hollywood. We'd think it'd be a bigger name than that, but it isn't. So anyway, that's my next. He's always got a cool car he drives around it too. He's hitting vampires and Frankenstein monsters sometimes with drop kicks, and this one, of course, vampires. So that's my next film. I don't know why they changed his name from Santo, because in the Spanish language Mexican versions, he is Santo versus the Vampire Women. That's how it would translate. For whatever reason, they changed it from Santo to Samson. The only thing I can think is maybe it's because they were also starting to bring in movies from Italy with all of the Hercules movies and these other characters from ancient mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and Samson was like one of the characters there. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. It's kind of a guess. But anyway, they changed the name. So if you see Samson versus some kind of monster, might be it's probably a Santo movie. Maybe it's Santo. That's my favorite one today.
Yeah, you've been dying to put that on, haven't you?
I have been. It's been sitting here for every episode. It's been sitting on my summer Santa Claus. Actually, it's what it sits on.
Well, now you got a chance.
But now I got it in there. I'm gonna probably. It's hot. And I bought this in Mexico, so this is an authentic. To say this on camera, I think I told you guys off camera one time. This is an authentic luchador mask.
I had one of those when I was a kid, and yeah, they were very hot. Mine was red.
Oh, okay.
And my brother and I got those, and we didn't know what they were. We just thought that the masks were cool, and so we got that, and of course we tie a towel around our neck and think we're superheroes, So it's like when you're a kid, you do.
That's what he was. He was a pro wrestler / superhero. He's one of the first, and he really was a groundbreaker in doing that, Santo, because then the Blue Demon started making his own movies, and I believe even Mil Mascaras in the 70s and 80s started making a couple of movies. So, it's a tradition that he started that continues unto, I believe, today. I believe some of the Mexican wrestlers still make these horror movies where they're fighting vampires and monsters and things like that every once in a while. They're a lot of fun. You can't. They're a lot of fun horror movies.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, my next one is God Told Me To from 1976. This is a Larry Cohen film, and according to Wikipedia, just like every other one of Larry's, almost every one, it's set in New York City. And it has a police detective that it's investigating all these killings, including a sniper from a water tower. And when he asked each and every one of them why they did it, they said, "God told me to." And it starts off first like that, where it's kind of almost a thriller. And then it switches to almost a supernatural, that there's actually a godlike character, that's actually trying to conjure up something. And it just, Larry Cohen, he just has some of these little oddball type of movies. And I mean, It's Alive movies, that he did, and this one from the 70s, and continued on for a while. But this is kind of his lesser known one. One that, again, I don't see many people talking about, and this is really good. I mean, if you like, it just the way it's filmed too, just has a certain, you have an easy feeling about it at the beginning, with all these the random shootings, a corrupt New York City cop who was stabbed, and all, and it's the blood is the 1970s looking blood. So it's like, from nowadays, you see, okay, that looks pretty fake. But when I first saw this on VHS, I was like, back in the 80s, it's like, it was still kind of, to me, I felt very uneasy about it. But I think that was probably the whole point, is, that, and then when they just say, God told me to, which has something so ominous, like, it's like, wish God, it's like, which God told you to do these things? And it's a good one. I mean, low budget, like all of Larry's films are, but I thought it was very well done. And if you like any of his other stuff and you haven't seen this, this is something to check out. And that's my third film.
Heard of that one? I haven't seen it. It sounds good though.
Yeah, sounds interesting. All right, so we come around to my fourth, and again, low budget, but this one doesn't look as low budget. I think they got by with a low budget because they have a very limited cast, something like 5 or 6 cast members, and that sort of helped them keep the budget down. It's called Island Escape, and it's from 2023. And it is, I don't want to give too much away. It's a very, very twisty sort of movie. There's a group of mercenaries are contacted and hired to go try to rescue this daughter of a rich billionaire kind of guy from this island where they're doing some kind of research. And they get there and they find there are these weird creatures that somehow look really familiar to them and start attacking them. And it, like I said, I don't want to give too much away. It's horror, but it's also science fiction. And it is one of those things that sort of messes with your head because there's a lot more going on than you would think. There's like time travel and a time loop and things like that. And it's pretty crazy. It's a very, very fun movie. And most of the characters are pretty believable. The acting is good. I mean, for an indie movie, the acting is good. Like I say, it doesn't look as much like an indie movie as some of the others. The production values are a little better. And it's just, I recommend that one. It's a fun movie, really. It's one of those where you start watching and you're like, okay, this seems kind of dumb. And then very quickly they just draw you in and you're like, what on earth is going on here? And so it's a good time.
Sounds good.
So that's
All
my
right.
fourth one.
Okay, sounds good. Pretty good too. All right, so my fourth one, I finally did go with the kaiju one on this one, 1966, The Magic Serpent. And I did this, I'm going to have to do a spoiler for this again because the whole reason to watch it is because this was the inspiration for the original Star Wars trilogy.
Ah,
People say it
Oh.
was Battle in Outer Space. I'm sure that also was influential on young George Lucas in the 60s. But the plot is Star Wars. It takes place in feudal Japan, and this one evil sorcerer comes into the town, and he can turn himself into this kaiju, and he knows all kinds of magic. And their only hope is 2 siblings, a brother and sister, who have to escape. And one of them gets trained by an ancient one who knows, the old ways of magic, right? And has to come back and defeat him. And the big reveal at the end, say it all with me, it's an I am your father moment.
Oh my God.
That comes into town. So I mean, it's unofficially the inspiration for Star Wars. I don't believe George Lucas has ever admitted this, but if you watch the movie, you will ask yourself, how could it not be when you watch the plot?
Right.
It's kind of like the first 3 Star Wars squashed into about an hour and a half and placed in like 17th feudal era of Japan. But it's actually pretty good. There's not a lot of kaiju in it. There's one battle in the end that is also well worth watching. But it is a fun little kaiju movie, and it's action packed. I mean, this thing is just jam packed from beginning to end. You don't miss a second because you've missed an hour. It is like Star Wars in that it would, instead of 6 hours, it takes place in an hour and a half. But it's an interesting one to watch, and there's no doubt where it led to. But a lot of fun though. So that's The Magic Serpent.
All right. My next one is called House on the Edge of the Park from 1980. and this is with David Hess. And this is basically, some people say it's a remake of Last House on the Left because it has a lot of the same themes going on. And of course, David Hess plays a bad guy, one of the criminals. And if you know your Italian horror movies, it has there's a lot of graphic violence, and I kind of think that I guess the director saw Last House on the Left and thought, oh, I think I can make this even gorier, and he did. And it's, I first saw this, I forget where I first saw this, but then it came on a Blu-ray with a double feature with some other movie I never even heard of before, and I haven't watched that one yet. But this one, the violence is up a notch, from the stuff that was going on in Last House on the Left. While Last House on the Left, usually most of it took place outdoors, this one takes place indoors. David Hess and his partner come in and to some party that's going on, and they get a little bit too rough, and violence ensues. And it's really good. I mean, if you love that Italian exploitation horror, this is something really up your alley, I think. And I like that the director got David Hess. So it's like, so now you have a tie-in to the original. Some people say it's a remake, some people say it's an alternate universe thing, because it has almost the same exact plot line to it, except the victims aren't teenage girls, and they're not out in the forest or the wooded area. It's all inside. So that is my fourth film.
Okay, well, that brings us back around to me, and my final one said I was doing another werewolf movie. This one literally just came out on disc a couple weeks ago. It was released in I don't know if it was released in streaming before that, maybe, but it just came out very recently. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any movies from the Polonia brothers. I think I did one in an earlier one. Yeah, Caddyhack, I think, is a Polonia brothers, if I remember right. Maybe it's not. But Polonia brothers, their movies are really, really low budget, and there's just a certain, I don't know, there's a certain charm to the way they get by with low budget. It's almost like sometimes they don't even care that they have low budget. They're just going to shoot it this way and you're going to accept it, sometimes. This one, the production values are higher than any of the rest of their movies. And part of that comes from, I know, Ron, you probably know about Cleopatra Records also does the movie company. Well, this was done in association with Cleopatra Movies. So they got to use a lot of soundtrack music, a lot of techno and goth music in it, which helps with the soundtrack. Plus, I think gave them a better budget. It's the idea on it is they do a little twist on the werewolf thing. When you get bitten by a werewolf, you don't turn on the full moon. Whatever happens to be your particular addiction, when you do that, that's when you turn. So this guy's addiction is cocaine. So whenever he does coke, he turns into a werewolf. So obviously there's a lot of cocaine in the movie, a lot of cocaine use in the movie, but it's a lot. There's also, though, you'll like this, Bill. There is a little nod to the original Wolfman movie, in that at one point, the werewolf that attacks him and kills him, he goes and he's wandering around after he's turned back, and discovers this woman, right? And she says she's the gypsy of such and such a place. And she's like, you killed my son. He bit you. So now you're going to be a werewolf. So that's a total nod to the first Wolfman movie. Um, but they also they do a really good job of sort of spoofing and making fun of indie horror films, because there's an indie horror film being produced in the woods there where this is all going on. And you get some gratuitous nudity, which has to happen in the indie movie. Um, and there's a scene, I love this one scene. There's a scene where the actors they're out in the woods, right? And so they're all trying to get a signal on their cell phone and they're wandering around. And it looks like something out of a Living Dead movie with them all staring at those screens looking for signal. It's just a really, really fun movie. Again, you can see that it's low budget and they don't try to hide that fact, but they do a really good job with the low budget. It's a lot of fun.
That one does sound pretty
You
good,
know,
actually.
you know, I'll say this. Sometimes a lot of low budget movies are better than big budgets
Sometimes they are.
because the big budgets, some of them tend to rely more on the special effects to
Yep.
to tell the story, and the low budget relies more on the acting to tell the story. Or sometimes they do it really. Yeah, especially if they got good acting, But it's like, so yeah, that's pretty. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I think we mentioned before that I think horror particularly benefits sometimes from a lower budget.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You don't want to show that monster too clearly because you'll be able to see it's a silly puppet
Right.
or a guy in a suit or something. So you kind of hide it. And then the monster kind of becomes whatever the viewer imagines. So it becomes
Exactly
better. Whereas the higher budget, we got CGI, we can make that monster look like whatever we want to. But that's some director or producer's vision. Whereas, you lose some of the audience that way. Anyway, at least it has the potential to do that. Anyway.
Right.
Anyway, that movie is a great segue into my last movie, which is also a werewolf movie, although not titled as such. Frankenstein's Bloody Terror is actually a werewolf movie.
Nice.
So the story behind that is, and it's supposed to be Mark of the Werewolf, was its Spanish title. It's Paul Naschy. It was made in Spain. It was supposed to be Mark of the Werewolf. Paul Naschy really wasn't an actor. He was a bodybuilder, and he wanted to be a writer. He wrote horror movies. He couldn't find an actor he wanted to be in his horror movie, so he wound up doing it himself. The movie comes over to the United States thanks to Independent International Pictures, which was a competitor of AIP. And I believe the owner of that production company was Sam Sherman. And for whatever reason, he really wanted a Dracula versus Frankenstein movie. He was just gung-ho over a Frankenstein movie to come to his studio. Al Adamson was his main director. He kind of worked on one off and on, but it was taking a really long time. So he started bringing in foreign movies, and he brought in this one and just changed the title because he wanted a Frankenstein movie, even though it was a werewolf movie. In the beginning, they have this, during the opening credits, they have this person overdub this explanation about how the name Wolfstein was part of the Frankenstein family, and it connects it somehow loosely to Frankenstein. And then when the movie starts, it's pretty much a werewolf movie. But it's Paul Naschy's first werewolf movie, and if you can get past that ridiculous title that does not have Frankenstein's Bloody Terror, it's actually not a bad movie. He's kind of like Ed Wood, not slopping over with talent, but he has enthusiasm for this genre that cannot be matched. Maybe even greater than Ed Wood's enthusiasm for this genre, and that's saying something. He really throws himself at this part. He made something like 13 or 14 werewolf movies in his career. This is his very first movie. First movie that he had any full involvement in. He came to the United States early on in the early 60s, maybe even late 50s, and did a couple of really small bit parts. The one that he's usually noted for is he was in the King of Kings, but he's like a guard standing in the background. You could hardly even see. If you blink, you literally miss him. So what do they have going for They have Paul Naschy's enthusiasm, as I mentioned. The other thing they have going for them is they don't really use sets. These are filmed in Spain. They just walk up to an old Spanish castle that's in ruins and they start filming. And that is incredible. It really makes it's better than any set you can do. That you can tell it's not cardboard. They're really on the ruins of an ancient Spanish castle that might be up to 1,000 years old, and it's really awesome sets. I mean, you just can't beat that. There's nothing you can do to beat that except travel to Spain and start filming like he did.
Like the Blind Dead movies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right there in the middle of it. So those sets are really, really incredible. And his plots are, a little bit over the top. This one might be more over the top than most, because it is his first. A vampire does show up late in the movie. There are gypsies. Here you go, Gary. You gave me another segue. There's a scene with gypsies that come in. I guess they're called Roma now, but they were
exactly.
gypsies when this was being filmed. And they're part of the victims in this movie, and there is a bit of blood. It's kind of the next step after the Hammer movies. Hammer started getting more and more blood, so when he started doing his movies, he started to have a little bit more blood.
Let me just add one thing. I would have said Roma, except that literally in Cocaine Werewolf, she says she's a gypsy.
Okay.
Gypsy of the area. So that's why I used the term. But you're right. It should be Roma now.
Fair enough. I'm not sure most people know Roma. You almost have to say Roma, which, by the way, is gypsy for the majority of people. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But in this movie, they were called gypsies as well. But yeah, it's a fun. It's another really, really fun movie with somebody just doing over the top werewolf acting, slashing at people, and running around he chains himself up to try and keep from killing people, and it just goes on and on. It's another one where you don't blink and miss almost the whole movie. There's action packed, beginning to end. If you can get past the ridiculous title of Frankenstein's Bloody Terror, it's really supposed to be Mark of the Werewolf. Is its literal Spanish translation would be Mark of the Werewolf. So, and it's his first movie, 1968. He goes on and on. He kept making movies well into the 2000s. His last werewolf movie, I think, is like 2008 or 10 or something like that. And it's basically kind of a skin flick that showed up on Cinemax, Skinemax, as they
Right.
call it. In one of those things. And he pops up in one of those things late in his career. I think it's like 14th movie. 14th werewolf movie, not just his 14th overall movie. In 1973, this guy came out like 8 or 10 Paul Naschy movies were released in 1973 alone. So he just kept making them and cranking them out. And he wrote almost all of them. And I have his biography, but I still haven't read the whole thing. So I'm still working on that. But Paul Naschy's another one that I don't talk enough about. You don't hear enough about. It's an acquired taste. Yeah, it's an acquired taste. I have definitely acquired it. When you're talking Euro horror, his name should be in there more often, in my opinion. Anyway, it should be up there towards the top. So that's my last one. Frankenstein's Bloody Terror.
Before Ron gets to his last one, I want to make one correction. I mentioned that I thought Caddy Hack might have been a Polonia Brothers. It is not. That was a mistake. So I don't want that. I just Googled it again because I wasn't sure about that. It sort of has a similar sort of indie charm, but yeah.
I got you.
All right.
Okay, I think all of my movies are indie movies too. Well, they're just
cool.
So there you go. But anyway, sorry, Ron.
All right, my last one is called Intruder from 1989, and this is a slasher film. It's set in a grocery store after hours, and the employees get killed one by one, and we have clues as to who we think the killer is, but it's, what I like about this is you don't see them. You just see the people actually getting killed and their reaction to who's coming up to them. And that's what I love the best from the slasher films is, you kind of keep people guessing. I mean, because there's really not much else outside of that makes a slasher unique, because they all start, the 80s was the big boom of that genre. And this has Renee Estevez, Charlie Sheen's younger sister or older sister, I don't remember which one, but it's a sibling. And it has two of the Raimi brothers, Sam and Ted. And then, of course, it has Bruce Campbell in it. He has a small part. He plays a cop. And what I liked about this is at the end, when we finally find out who the killer is, and we think that he's dead, all of a sudden, as the movie fades to credits, you hear a scream. So it's like we don't know whether or not the killer is still alive or not, because that's the one thing I notice with serial killers. If they're not, they seem to always be these unstoppable things, and some of them I get it. Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason, to name a few. Those are almost supernatural entities. But if you're just a regular guy off the street and you go on a killing spree, and someone, you're not going to take 6 bullets and get up. So, but that's the wonderful thing about the slasher films, is they don't really care about being realistic. They just, it's like this person's going to come back.
The thing that I've always said about those slasher movies too, it's like I can completely understand you've gone through this whole fight and taken the dude down once. He gets back up. The next time I get him down, I'm cutting him into little pieces and I'm taking something important with me, like a heart. He's not coming back.
Right. Or at least, dismember him and have, everybody take the pieces to as far away from that area as possible. But yeah, that's the one thing about the slashers, is that they're just ridiculous fun.
Yeah.
Some of those movies too, though, like the first iterations, they weren't supernatural. Like the first Jason and the first Mike Myers, they were supposed to be.
Well, the first Michael Myers, though, he was always that way, because in fact, John Carpenter saw him as his character was actually called the Shape, and he was like the embodiment of evil. And if you remember, he does get shot. He falls down out the window, and they look and see his body there. And then you look again at the end, and he's gone.
Yeah, well, at the very end, yes. But yeah. I mean, throughout the movie, when I was watching, I usually think he's because he was supposed to be a mental patient that was escaped. And it looked like he was pretty, but it was, I guess you could say the same thing about Jason too, then. He's kind of mortal throughout the whole thing, except for that one thing at the post-credits thing where he out of the water and
until the 5th movie, when they shove a steel pike through him, his corpse, and then the lightning hits it and he comes back as like Frankenstein, a la Frankenstein. From that point forward, he's completely supernatural. But
so I don't know, they're kind of mortal at first, and then I don't know. Anyway, sometimes I watch them when they're supposed to be mortal too, and I'm like, if I just got hit with that, I would have just say, you know what, the heck with this lady, she can live. I'm out of here.
I was saying, Ron, the other thing I was going to say can be uniqueness to a slasher movie is the kills, and that's important. Doing creative kills, that's one of the most important things in a slasher.
I think that this had some creative kills. Different items that they had in the grocery store, in the back, in the stock room, they used some of those things. And this was one of those ones I first saw on VHS in the video store, and that I used to work at, and because I was on a full-blown in the 80s, I had to watch everyone. And now I finished watching all the, what I call the name brands. Now I was going for, now want to go to the other ones, that were the lesser knowns. Now a lot of them are known, but, like The Burning and Madman and things like that. But this is a great slasher film, The Intruder, not The Intruder, just Intruder, and I like that it takes place at a grocery store after hours, and good acting, and it's funny how they bring in Bruce Campbell into it, and the director is Scott Spiegel, who is between him, Sam Raimi, and Bruce. They're like friends, really good friends. So of course their friends are gonna bring you into their own other films and say, hey, come on to my film. Sure, why not? But that's my final film. So everybody, we got 15 different movies to go check out. Now, all of these pretty much are off the beaten path. So I recommend people start going that route because we've all seen the main franchises of horror. And a lot of the people on YouTube talk about those repeatedly. I mean, I think they're talking about them to death, personally. So it's nice to go and find stuff like what we've talked about. So again, this is part 1 of 2. And thank you guys again. We've got Gary and Bill and myself.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again. It's been fun, always.
And before we go off the air, is that a stuffed Godzilla behind you there, Ron?
That sure is. That's him.
I have one of those too. I have an action figure here, but it's not a stuffed one. I do have a stuffed Godzilla actually upstairs. I don't have it at arm's reach, but I have a Godzilla and I have a Gamera at arm's reach as well, actually, today.
Oh, I need to get a camera.
You know what? I've got something not that far removed from Godzilla behind me.
What you got?
I have a Gorn.
Oh, there you go.
Gorn.
Ah,
With
with his Argyle sweater.
Yeah.
Looks like his grandma knitted it for him.
Yeah.
All right, so thanks again, guys. And have fun watching all these movies or tracking them down. Thank you very much for watching this episode. And stay tuned for the next one. Thank you very much for watching this episode. And stay tuned for the next one.